Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hey there.
Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating stack of sources. This one was curated by someone called the Pythonist programmer,
Okay.
and it pulls together threads from, well, all over the place. Quantum physics, government data use, the psychology behind scrolling, even the beauty industry.
Wow, that's quite the mix. So our mission for this deep dive then is to unpack all this seemingly disparate information.
Exactly. Find those core insights, help you connect the dots on topics really shaping our world right now.
Right, from like bleeding edge tech to how we interact with each other and, the systems all around us.
We've definitely got a lot to cover, so let's just jump right into this at of sources and see what they reveal.
Let's do it. So we're starting with AI's expanding presence, and it's showing up in some places you might not immediately expect, like government operations.
Okay, yeah. One source details this Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, right?
DOGE.
And it says they used Meta's Llama 2 model. What were they reportedly doing with it?
Well, according to the source, they were using it to analyze federal workers' responses, specifically to that fork in the road email.
Oh, right. I remember hearing about that one.
Yeah, the one offering employees a chance to resign if they opposed policy changes, things like return to office mandates, downsizing, or loyalty requirements. And the article notes the model likely ran locally, on their own systems.
Okay.
And apparently Meta didn't comment on DOGE using their tech for this.
Interesting. And this wasn't just like a one-off thing, was it? What else did the sources say about DOGE?
No, it seems like a broader operation. They reported that DOGE operatives were actually embedded in various agencies, including OPM, the Office of Personnel Management.
Embedded. Wow.
Yeah. And one piece suggested this connects to the bigger picture roadmap, the Trump administration's Project 2025.
Okay, I see.
The idea presented in the source is that DOGE is sort of permeating the government, maybe operating with some secrecy.
To do what, exactly?
Well, to collect, combine, and analyze data that was never really intended to be, linked together like that.
And there's another layer here, too, involving Elon Musk's AI. Didn't a source bring up XAI Grok?
Yes, exactly. That report mentioned DOGE is reportedly using Grok to parse sensitive federal data.
Sensitive federal data.
Yeah. And this raises a pretty big concern, as the source points out, that, American citizens' personal information could potentially end up as training data for Grok.
Right. That's a huge privacy implication.
Definitely. And they also note the potential for Grok to be used even more down the line, maybe through deals with Microsoft Azure and Palantir.
Okay, so as we cover this, it's really important we stress we're just relaying what the sources claim.
Absolutely.
About DOGE's actions and, their alleged goals. Things like finding or surveilling immigrants or maybe assisting the DOJ on voter fraud cases. We're reporting the source's perspective impartially.
Right. Not endorsing, just reporting the claims.
Exactly. So moving on from government offices, where else did the sources show AI having a big, maybe even troubling impact right now?
Well, education came up significantly. One source really focused on AI detection software in schools.
Ah, yes. Calling it a new headache for honest students.
Mm-hmm. And the personal stories in that piece were pretty striking, weren't they?
They really were. Liberal's story. Accused of using AI on a paper.
Yeah, even though her Google Docs history apparently showed 2 days of drafting and revising.
So what did she have to do?
Get this, she had to put together and send a 15-page PDF full of screenshots and notes just to prove she wrote it herself.
15 pages? That's insane.
I know, and she wasn't alone. Kelsey Oman, accused by Turnitin just weeks before graduation, found out others in her class got flagged too.
Oh, wow.
And for 2 students, it actually delayed their graduation.
Unbelievable. And the stats behind these detectors are, well, they're concerning, right? What did the sources say about reliability?
Yeah, this is where it gets really problematic. Studies found pretty high false positive rates.
Like how high?
One study looked at a dozen services, found they flagged human writing as AI about 6.8% of the time on average.
Almost 7%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Turnitin's rate was reported at 4% in 2023. And OpenAI's detector, before they pulled it, that was 9%.
9%.
So the sources basically said, look, these tools just aren't reliable enough for practical use. They absolutely shouldn't be the only reason for an accusation.
And there was a specific concern about who might get flagged more often?
Yes, exactly. The worry that detectors might be more likely to misclassify work from non-native English speakers?
You can just imagine the anxiety that causes.
Oh, absolutely. It's leading to, real human impact, student anxiety, and what one source called self-preservation measures.
Self-preservation, what does that mean in practice?
It means students are going to pretty extreme lengths, like making hours-long screen recordings of themselves writing. Yeah, Leigh Burrell apparently uploaded a 93-minute YouTube video of her process, just to have proof.
93 minutes.
Others are sticking to word processors with really detailed edit histories, trying to document everything.
Given this lack of reliability, some universities are pushing back, though.
Yeah, thankfully. Some places like UC Berkeley, Vanderbilt, Georgetown, they're either disabling these detection features or at least advising caution.
Because they know they're not reliable.
Pretty much. And it highlights the challenge for teachers too, right?
For sure.
The source mentioned one teacher, Catherine Mayo, who's changing assignments now, making them more personal, harder to just, farm out to AI.
And talking to students differently.
Yeah, trying to have, gentler conversations if they suspect misuse rather than just relying on a software flag.
So, okay, we've seen AI in government analysis, academic detection. Where else are we seeing AI impact daily life in new ways, according to the sources?
Commerce is a big one. Shopping, specifically.
Right. Google's new AI shopping features from Google I/O.
Exactly. One source detailed those.
This sounds like it could really change how we shop online. What are some of these features?
Well, there's this new AI mode. It gives you summarized answers to, complex shopping questions.
Instead of just a list of products.
Right. It can answer things like, what pairs well with this shirt? Or find me a travel bag for rainy weather. And then it gives you relevant product listings you can sort of refine.
Okay, that's interesting. And then there's that feature that sounds almost like a personal shopper with a bank account.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's called agentic checkout. It works through Google Pay.
Agentic checkout. How does that work?
The AI can track price drops on specific items you like, down to the size and color.
Okay.
And if the price hits a target you've set, it can automatically buy it for you.
Whoa. Automatically completes the purchase.
Yeah. Now, Google's being cautious here. They mentioned the risk of AI hallucinations.
Hallucinations, like showing the wrong price.
Exactly. But they state the AI won't actually buy it if the price is higher than what you agreed on.
Okay, that's something. They also expanded the virtual try-on feature, didn't they?
They did. You can now upload your own full-length photos. Before, it was just on selected models they provided.
And they say those photos aren't shared.
That's what they state, yes.
So this is a pretty significant expansion of AI into retail. What's the broader context here?
Well, the sources framed shopping as this rapidly growing frontier for AI. It's not just Google, OpenAI, Perplexity. They're getting into AI shopping too.
Makes sense.
And the numbers are pretty wild. One source cited a massive growth in traffic from generative AI to retailers, something like a 1,300% increase year over year.
1,300%.
Yeah. Huge jump.
And what does this mean for the brands themselves then? What do they need to do?
According to one source, they really need to make sure their product information is meticulously updated. Perfect.
Why is that?
Because if they want their products to show up accurately in these new AI interfaces, the underlying data has got to be spot on. Otherwise, the AI might miss them or represent them incorrectly.
Right, garbage in, garbage out, basically.
Pretty much. So, okay, let's shift gears a bit. Away from the AI systems influencing us, and look at how tech intersects with human behavior and psychology in some really unique ways.
Okay. One source had a really compelling take on pathological demand avoidance, PDA, framing it not just behaviorally, but almost as an existential signal, like a protest against erasure.
That's such a powerful way to put it, isn't it? The idea is for someone experiencing PDA, every single demand, even a small or gentle one, can feel like a tiny dying.
A tiny dying.
Yeah, the death of spontaneity, of self-directedness, of what the source called the wild self. And this triggers intense anxiety, puts the nervous system on high alert.
So the core idea isn't defiance of the task itself.
Not necessarily, no. It's more like resisting the feeling of being taken over by expectations, by pressure. Even if the person actually wants to do the thing, the demand itself is the trigger.
It's the demand, not the action.
Exactly. It's described in the source as a kind of sacred resistance to feeling consumed or, disappearing into obedience.
Wow. And did the source offer strategies based on this perspective? Ways to help or interact?
It did. It suggested focusing on things like permission over pressure, playfulness over rigid planning, presence over just pushing for productivity.
And witnessing the protest itself.
Yeah, witnessing that resistance as sacred, as valid. The concluding thought from that source really stuck with me. I want to be here, but only as myself.
Only as myself. That's powerful.
It really is. And that idea of internal resistance connects interestingly to how another source suggests we navigate our digital interactions.
Also,
Well, this source explored the provocative idea that maybe we're, quote, literally worshiping your phone.
whoa, okay. Worshiping your phone. That's a strong statement. What did they mean?
They pointed to the kind of language and attitudes you sometimes see in Silicon Valley, talking about AI as God, accelerationism, even actual AI worship churches popping up.
Right, I've heard bits about that.
But they also looked at how everyday users interact with technology, specifically the algorithm.
Okay. How does that translate into, like, worshipful behavior for the average person?
They suggested we simplify this incredibly complex algorithm into something almost personified, an entity that really knows me. And we use phrases that sound a bit like religious cliches, the kind that stop you from thinking deeper, like the algorithm works in mysterious ways, or this video was meant for you.
Yeah, I can see that. So it's not just the language, but the actions, too.
Exactly. They described getting lost in the scroll state as becoming this sort of ritualistic interaction.
A ritual.
Yeah, like a kind of prayer to this hidden omniscient entity, hoping for a reward, the perfect video, the right connection. You're embodying an algorithmized self, constantly feeding the system.
And influencers waiting for their content to hit the right audience.
The source likened that to asking for a miracle, yeah. Waiting for the algorithm's blessing.
And the platforms themselves encourage this.
Well, they tap into something the sociologist Durkheim called collective effervescence.
Collective effervescence.
That heightened emotional feeling you get from shared participation, like with memes or trends. The source argued we sometimes confuse that psychological reward, feeling like you belong, sharing energy with something maybe closer to worship.
And likes, shares, views.
Yeah.
They reinforce that.
They legitimize the content as part of a shared ritual, yeah. And comment sections can feel like your individuality just dissolves into this big group energy.
So what was the main takeaway? Is this bad?
The source wasn't necessarily saying it's inherently bad, but that awareness is key.
Just knowing you're doing it.
Yeah. Knowing you're engaging in this kind of ritual helps you avoid manipulation and just understand the dynamic better. Remember, it is a ritual driven by code.
Okay. That's a lot to think about with our phone habits.
For sure.
So, from navigating digital demands and rituals, let's look at a new way humans are using tech for creation. One source introduced something called vibe coding.
Vibe coding. Yeah, this was framed as potentially a fundamental shift in software development. Andrzej Karpathy coined the term.
Okay, vibe coding. How is it different from, regular coding?
Well, instead of meticulously writing every single line of code yourself, the idea is you use natural language. You sort of vibe with AI tools.
Vibe with them.
Yeah, you provide the vision, the creative direction, and the AI handles the actual implementation, the code writing.
And debugging. What happens when something goes wrong?
Debugging is basically explaining the problem to the AI in natural language, not hunting through lines of code yourself.
Wow. Okay. What's the potential impact of that? That sounds huge.
The sources suggest it could really lower the technical barriers to creating software, make it more democratic.
Democratizing creation.
Yeah, and it represents a move toward what they called human-AI co-agency, where the machines adapt more to how humans naturally communicate.
They drew a parallel to something historical.
Right. To Doug Engelbart's famous Mother of All Demos from back in the 60s, that first showed how computers could augment human intellect. Vibe coding is seen as maybe the next step in that.
And this isn't just theory, right? It's actually happening.
Yes, definitely. They gave examples, gatherings, hackathons specifically focused on vibe coding.
Really?
Yeah. And they mentioned AI agents like Manos being used to generate functional websites really quickly just from natural language prompts, like in the time it takes to have a coffee meeting.
That's incredible.
There's even a vibe coding game jam. Participants had to make sure over 80% of their game's code was AI generated.
And people entered.
Over 1,000 entries.
Wow. Okay, that sounds incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But there must be challenges, right? Downsides.
Oh, absolutely. Big ones were highlighted. Security is a major concern.
Vulnerabilities in the AI code.
Exactly. And maintenance is another huge issue. They described it as potentially creating technical debt at scale.
Technical debt at scale, I can see that.
And then, of course, you have the more philosophical questions, like who's the author? What about intellectual property when the AI wrote most of the code?
Right. Big questions there. Okay, let's pivot now to how all this tech interacts with legal, political, economic systems, power structures, regulations.
Yeah, several sources touched on this. A prime example was that ongoing conflict between Apple and Epic Games.
Ah, yes. Over the App Store, payment systems. Started with Fortnite, right?
Exactly. Epic tried to use its own payment option for Fortnite purchases, bypassing Apple's cut.
And Apple mostly won the big antitrust case, but there was a specific part they lost.
Right. A court did order Apple, based on a California state law, to allow developers to link out to alternative payment methods.
Okay. And Apple's reaction, according to the sources, was not great.
Not great is putting it mildly.
Yeah,
The
man.
sources used pretty strong language, called it bad faith compliance.
That is fake.
Yeah. And Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rodgers apparently had a very strong reaction, even reportedly threatened a criminal referral, and demanded an Apple exec show up in court to explain why they were defying the order.
Yikes. One source even quoted an internal Apple attitude.
Yeah, quoting a communications chief, apparently saying, and this is from the source, it's our Things store.
Okay. Tells you something.
It does. And the sources noted the appeals court didn't immediately stop the judge's order, so it went into effect for a bit before Apple eventually did comply and let Fortnite back.
Quite the saga. And related to this idea of powerful companies maybe pushing back against rules, one source briefly mentioned Intuit.
Yeah, the company behind QuickBooks and TurboTax.
What was the angle there?
That piece reported on Intuit's lobbying efforts against the government's free tax filing service, DirectFile.
Trying to block competition.
That's the implication reported. It also mentioned their price increases and previous findings that they deceived customers. The source, reporting impartially, framed it as fitting an idea of economic termites.
Okay. Shifting from corporate power to government power. Accessing data. There was a report about the U.S. intelligence community wanting to buy private data.
Yes, looking to create a kind of centralized place, a one-stop shop, to buy private data from data brokers.
Data brokers. The ones who sell data, often gathered for marketing.
Exactly. The plan is reportedly for an intelligence community data consortium, and they'd use AI to sift through all this data they buy.
And the big privacy concern here raised by the source.
Well, the source highlighted that this data includes really precise location information.
Like where people are, specifically.
Yeah, which could potentially allow surveillance without needing a warrant. It's seen as exploiting a legal loophole.
And beyond surveillance.
They also noted concerns this kind of data could make things like blackmail, stalking, or harassment easier.
That's worrying. Was there any attempt in Congress to stop this?
There was. Federal lawmakers tried to ban this practice. The bill was called the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act.
Did it pass?
It passed the House, but according to the source, it was rejected by the Senate.
Okay. Let's look internationally now at regulating online behavior. A source talked about Sweden expanding its anti-sex work law.
Right, the Nordic model, which targets the buyers of sex work.
And they've now expanded this to cover online services specifically.
That's right. The law now makes it a crime to pay for things like custom OnlyFans clips or interactive camming sessions.
And the penalty is for the buyer.
Yes, the buyer can face up to a year in prison. The law targets the buyer, not the seller.
But critics have issues with that approach.
Yeah, critics argue that criminalizing any part of the transaction actually makes the work more dangerous for the sellers. They say the real goal seems to be abolition, not necessarily safety.
And the source pointed out a potential contradiction in the law.
Yeah, the critique highlighted that it seems weird, right? It's illegal to pay a worker directly for custom content they create for you.
Okay.
But it's still legal to consume content that's maybe studio produced or even stolen content.
Huh. That does seem inconsistent. Is this Nordic model approach spreading?
Well, according to the source, Maine in the U.S. adopted it in 2023.
Okay.
And there's this broader concern mentioned that if criminalizing online adult content works, maybe it could expand later to criminalize other representations of sexuality or gender online.
Something to watch.
Yes.
And just for context on OnlyFans itself, what did the source mention?
Just that its parent company is reportedly in talks to sell. for potentially $8 billion.
$8 billion.
Yeah, shows its massive growth and the huge profits for the owner. They also briefly mentioned past criticisms and legal issues the platform faced: trafficking allegations, child material concerns, even a lawsuit about whether users were messaging real people or bots.
Right. Complex platform. Okay, finally in this section, let's touch on shifts in more traditional markets, the beauty industry.
Yeah, sources reported kind of lackluster earnings from several major beauty companies.
And what do they say about the old lipstick index theory?
That theory, that small luxuries like lipstick sell well even when the economy's bad, well, the report suggested that might be ending.
Interesting. Why the slump? Is it just the economy and inflation?
Those are factors, yeah. But the sources also pointed to other things, like customized moderation.
Customized moderation.
Meaning shoppers are being much choosier, more discerning, really thinking about what they buy. And also just information overload. There are so many options now.
So consumer behavior is changing.
Definitely. Beauty is maybe seen as more non-essential now. And people are actively looking for value, for deals.
And platforms like TikTok Shop and Amazon are playing a role.
Big time. Putting a lot of price pressure on the traditional retailers.
There was even a mention of a trend called under-consumption core.
Right. Reflecting this desire to buy less, be more thoughtful. The sources noted that big beauty brands aren't just competing with each other anymore. They're competing with, news headlines for attention.
Wow. So what's the outlook for the industry then?
The source suggested that innovation and individuality matter more now than ever. And crucially, that value doesn't just mean lower prices. It means brands need to invest in the actual product. Quality, uniqueness. That's where the value is perceived now.
Makes sense. Okay, now let's take a quick moment to look beyond these immediate digital and market trends. One source gave us a glimpse into new physics.
Yeah, this is pretty fascinating. The theoretical concept of paraparticles.
Paraparticles. Okay, what are those?
Potentially a new third type of quantum particle, different from the two we know well. Fermions, which make up matter.
Like electrons, protons?
Exactly, and bosons, which carry forces, like photons.
Okay. So what makes paraparticles different?
It's about how their quantum state changes when you swap two identical ones. Fermions get a minus sign, basically why no two can be in the exact same state. Pauli exclusion principle.
Right.
Bosons don't get a minus sign, so they can pile into the same state. Think lasers.
Okay, and paraparticles.
They're theorized, based on some new math, to be able to pack a few particles into the same state. More than fermions allow, but not unlimited like bosons. Sort of an in-between category.
Huh. And the theory involves hidden states.
Yeah, the source mentioned complex theoretical stuff about hidden internal states and how these paraparticles might not be truly indistinguishable in the strictest quantum sense. Apparently, new work is challenging older ideas that said only fermions and bosons could exist in 3D space.
If they do exist, where would physicists actually look for them?
They probably wouldn't be fundamental particles floating around. More likely, they'd show up as quasi-particles.
Quasi-particles, like emergent behaviors in materials.
Exactly. Emergent phenomena within exotic quantum materials that act like particles with these weird properties.
And if they find them, what's the potential impact?
Well, according to the source, finding them could lead to new ways to model exotic phases of matter, or maybe even advances in quantum computing, perhaps using systems like Rydberg atoms.
Okay, but we need to ground this a bit.
Oh, absolutely. The source was clear. While some physicists are optimistic about maybe finding them experimentally, right now they're mainly described as a theoretical curiosity.
A theoretical curiosity. Still, fascinating stuff.
Definitely mind-bending.
Wow. Okay, we have certainly covered a vast landscape in this deep dive. I mean, we started with AI analyzing government emails and potentially doing our online shopping.
Right. Then we delved into the psychology of demands, these potential digital rituals.
Explored vibe coding, this new way of creating with AI.
Navigated corporate power struggles, government data access, international regulations on online content.
Touched on shifts in big industries like beauty.
And even peered into theoretical quantum physics with paraparticles.
Pulling sources together like this, even when they seem totally unrelated at first, really does help paint a more complex, interconnected picture, doesn't it?
It really does. You start to see the common threads. Technology's influence just keeps growing, impact in everything.
And how humans are adapting or sometimes, pushing back.
Yeah. Yeah, that constant dance between innovation, regulation, and these different power structures.
Absolutely. So, to leave you, our listener, with a provocative thought for this deep dive,
Mm.
consider how all this growing power and sophistication of AI and technology,
Hmm.
from analyzing emails and buying things for us to maybe fundamentally changing how we build software,
Mm.
how might that interact with that really deep-seated human need for autonomy, for
Oh,
control?
right. We saw that with the PDA discussion, resistance to feeling taken over.
Exactly. And how people navigate digital demands, digital rituals. So how will this relentless push for efficiency and analysis, how will it shape our individual, our collective drive for, self-directedness?
That's a big question. Definitely something to reflect on.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Episode sources: AI reality check. A new headache for honest students proving they didn't use AI. AI shopping is coming to Google. DOGE used a Meta AI model to review emails from federal workers. Elon Musk says he'll step back from the government. EOGE isn't going anywhere. The U.S. is building a one-stop shop for buying your data. Vibe coding is rewriting the rules of technology. Human at the center. A new headache for honest students proving they didn't use AI tax. DOGE used a Meta AI model to review emails from federal workers. Elon Musk says he'll step back from the government. DOGE isn't going anywhere. PDA is existential dread. Sweden expands anti-sex work law to criminalize paying for custom OnlyFans clips and camming. The end of the lipstick index. The U.S. is building a one-stop shop for buying your data. Vibe coding is rewriting the rules of technology. You're literally worshiping your phone. Neurocomplexity and burnout. PDA as existential dread. Emerging tech. Real impact. AI shopping is coming to Google. OnlyFans is reportedly in talks to sell off its porn empire. Sweden expands anti-sex work law to criminalize paying for custom OnlyFans clips and camming. The quest to prove the existence of a new type of quantum particle. Vibe coding is rewriting the rules of technology. Digital safety and ethics. Apple at case around with court order finds out. DOGE used a Meta AI model to review emails from federal workers. Elon Musk says he'll step back from the government. DOGE isn't going anywhere. OnlyFans is reportedly in talks to sell off its porn empire. Sweden expands anti-sex work law to criminalize paying for custom OnlyFans clips and camming. The U.S. is building a one-stop shop for buying your data. Vibe coding is rewriting the rules of technology. You're literally worshiping your phone. Brand stewardship and visibility. AI shopping is coming to Google. Apple app at case around with court order finds out. OnlyFans is reportedly in talks to sell off its porn empire. The end of the lipstick index. Global tech politics. Apple acted ace around with court order finds out. DOGE used a Meta AI model to review emails from federal workers. Elon Musk says he'll step back from the government. DOGE isn't going anywhere. Sweden expands anti-sex work law to criminalize paying for custom OnlyFans clips and camming. The U.S. is building a one-stop shop for buying your data.